America is at risk. I think this is a very important debate to have, because many of our elites are sleepwalking, as though we are managing at the margins, trivial problems. So I want to discuss Afghanistan, which is the topic of the moment, but I want to discuss it in a way that makes sense historically. And to discuss strategy in Afghanistan without first defining the larger war and outlining a strategy in the larger war would be like discussing Gettysburg without taking into account the Civil War of which it was a part. I think the fact is the United States has three great national security challenges, each of which is dramatically different. The first is the threat from radical Islamists, which is what today's speech will mostly focus on. The second is the challenge of competing successfully with China and India in order to sustain the largest, most productive, and most advanced economy in the world, which is the sine qua non of our being able to sustain our national security system. We have had an enormous advantage for at least 160 years of being the largest economy in the world. It enabled us to drown Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan. It enabled us to contain and ultimately defeat the Soviet Union. And if we lose that advantage, we will in the long run lose our national security, and we will lose our ability to sustain freedom. The third great challenge is the destructive influence of a secular socialist system. The fact is the secular wing of that system does not want to talk about radical Islamists, and the socialist wing defends reactionary institutions that are incompetent in order to prop them up rather than change them as is needed to compete in the world market. Any strategy we design to win the struggle with radical Islamists has to also take into account the requirement to rebuild our economy so that we are competitive with China and India. Sustaining America's freedom and sustaining America's economic capabilities was integral to the ability to contain the Soviet Empire. This is not a war on terrorism. Terrorism is an activity. This is a struggle with radical Islamists in both their militant and their stealth form. The militant form believe in using military power in one form or another. The stealth form believes in using cultural, intellectual, and political, but their end goal is exactly the same. The fight against Sharia and the madrasas and mosques which teach hatred and fanaticism is the heart of the enemy movement from which the terrorists spring forth. And it's time we had a national debate on this, and one of the things I'm going to suggest today is a federal law which says no court anywhere in the United States under any circumstance is allowed to consider Sharia as a replacement for American law, period. I think that there are three fronts in the current conflict that are decisive. The central front is the United States. If we do not secure this country, we will in fact lose. The second front is Europe, precisely the model of the Cold War. If we do not help reassert civilization in Europe and insist on the defeat of radical Islamists in Europe, we will in the long run lose. And the third front is the Middle East. We cannot afford defeat in Afghanistan. The moral effects around the planet, the increase in morale of the radical jihadists, and the damage to Western civilization will be incalculable. Great powers should be careful about starting, but once they start, they should be relentless and implacable about winning, and it is very dangerous for us to talk about how we're going to somehow have a magic date at which we leave no matter the consequences, because that means we're not thinking about the consequences. But think about the scale of what we did after 1947. We said, all right, we're faced with a genuine worldwide Soviet threat. All right, invent the Central Intelligence Agency, the Strategic Air Command, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, rebuild our military capabilities, send aid around the planet, rebuild Europe through the Marshall Plan, create a momentum of scientific, technological, economic, and political change so that the Soviet Union is isolated and incapable of competing. It took 40 years. And the planet got richer, and it got freer, and it became more working together and greater world trade and the largest middle class in the history of human beings. And in the process, we contained the Soviet Empire until it collapsed. I mean, there are moments in history when you have to stand up and say, okay, tell me the size of the problem, I'll go get a solution of same size. I will overmatch the problem. That's what Americans are all about. These are difficult times. It requires us to tell the truth. It requires us to think carefully and long about a grand national strategy. It requires us to recommit ourselves to freedom. But it requires us also to say to the radical Islamists, as we said to the British government, as we said at a time of disunion, as we said to Nazi Germany, as we said to the Soviet Union, freedom will prevail. Thank you. Questions? Thank you all.